LBC. It's 12 minutes past 12, and I think if you cast your mind back, Eddie Fisher, Rosemary Clooney, Lita Rosa, Guy Mitchell, Joe Stafford, David Whitfield, and many others. They were some of the names at the top of the popular music business until, I think if my memory serves me correctly, in about 1954, this sound broke the barrier. Well, that record on the soundtrack of the film Blackboard Jungle changed popular music. It opened the door for 1,001 performers described by the term rock and roll, and it started new ways of behaving, new ways of dressing. And this morning, we meet the man responsible for all that. I think we can blame him for it, Bill Haley. Hello.
Hello, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, you were in business, of course, quite a long while before rock around the clock, and before we started to use the term rock and roll generally. Tell us about the early stages of your career, about the groups you had before the Comets.
Well, Brian, it all started for me, I would say about 1945, 46, right after the end of the war. We broke in as basically country and western, and I did extensive traveling as a very young artist all over the United States. Ended up in the South near New Orleans and learned Dixieland and the blues, race music as we called it in those days, and went back to Chicago, went back to the east, to Connecticut, and ended up in a little town in Pennsylvania, thoroughly unsatisfied with what I hadn't found anything to fulfill what I felt I had in music, and after the mixture of all these tunes, what my natural way of playing was a combination of country and western and Dixieland and rhythm and blues music. This was the style. I went to work for a small radio station outside of Philadelphia in Chester, Pennsylvania, and was there for 4 or 5 years with the band playing live. For a small record company in Philadelphia heard us on the radio station and recorded us, and that's how rock and roll music began.
So it was a sort of a process of elimination. You had all kinds of different music that you'd been involved in, and gradually you came down to what you thought was the most effective for your kind of
Yes,
palate.
Brian, it was a mixture. It wasn't. It was a thing that I was unknowingly searching for. In other words, a style of my own, and the combination of just naturally of playing the music that I had listened to and playing it the way I felt and the way we put it together. Formed the style that today is known as rock and roll.
In a moment we'll talk a bit more about rock and roll as it was then, and probably a bit as it is now. With me is Bill Haley. Brian Hayes on LBC. With me this Wednesday lunchtime, jumping ahead of myself, is Bill Haley. And we talked just a moment ago, Bill, about your early career. Can you answer the question, what do you think was the first rock and roll record?
Well, yes, Brian, I can discuss that. The very first rock and roll record, of course, it wasn't known as rock and roll then, but it was a tune called "We're Gonna Rock This Joint Tonight." And this, of course, we're speaking now, Brian, of the years before the name. There was no name. There just wasn't any of this style of music, and there was a rhythm and blues show, or a race show, as they called it in those days. There was no. They didn't use the word rhythm and blues. That preceded my radio show, and it signed off with an old record of a blues tune called "Rock the Joint." And as I was doing a lot of nightclub engagements at that time, and I liked the tune, and as it signed off before I signed on every day, the tune was constantly with me. And I started to use it in the nightclubs as a country and western group. And it caused such a hubbub and such a stir. This was one of the first songs that I made records when I started to make records. And this was our first hit record. It was in 1951, and this being some 3 years before Rock Around the Clock. And so this really was the first rock and roll record.
Was the term rock and roll originally used only by the black performers?
No. The term rock and roll came from a tune that I wrote called "Rock-A-Beatin' Boogie." And this came in, I think it was about 1954 when I wrote the song. And the opening lyric of the tune is "Rock, rock, rock, everybody, roll, 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 everybody, rock-a-beatin' boogie beat." A few years after that, a disc jockey by the name of Alan Freed, who did a show in Cleveland, Ohio, used the record as his theme. And as the show would open, and would come on, rock, 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 everybody, roll, 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 everybody. Used to pound the desk and holler, rock, rock, rock and roll, everybody. And this is where the coin rock and roll was phrased from.
Of course, like any young musician, you were obviously heading for the big time, or trying to head for the big time. Did you really believe that you were going to, as you subsequently turned out to, change the face or the sound of popular music?
No, Brian, I had no idea. As any young, I wish I could say, and a lot of people think that that's the case, but I had that was far beyond my wildest dreams.
You were looking for hit records, though, weren't
I
you?
was looking for a style. I was looking for hit records, and hoping to roll with the flow. But as it turned out, I created a flow, and then, of course, it did eventually change the style of music up till this day.
Is it unfair to say that probably because rock and roll, rock around the clock was actually used for Blackboard Jungle, that broke the ice?
Well, Brian, in 1951 was We're Gonna Rock This Joint Tonight.
Yeah.
1952, I wrote a tune called Crazy Man Crazy, which is always overlooked. This tune became our first million seller, and it had the phrase, go, 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 everybody. This was the tune that the kids marched in the streets to and sang at football games and what have you. And this opened the doors for everything. And then it was a year later that we did Rock Around the Clock, and some 2 years later that they did Blackboard Jungle. But at the time MGM did Blackboard Jungle, it was the first film for Sidney Poitier and, of course, Glenn Ford, who was a big star then. And they as they do today, they were looking for a song that would appeal to the young people, and Rock Around the Clock was available.
So probably what it did was put it on the international stage.
International map, yes, of course, and with a great bit of help, of course, from Glenn Ford and from MGM, and it was a great showcase. But this, truthfully, did break it open worldwide.
How did you feel when people were dancing in the aisles and reacting the way they did?
Well, Ryan, it was the real shock to me was when I came to England the first time, because we had great success in the United States, and we had gone to Australia and had great success in Australia at this time, and came back and. But the real tremendous success of it, I think, broke right here in London and in England in 1957 when we arrived. And, of course, by that time we had done our first picture for Columbia, which was called Rock Around the Clock. And everything was just happening so fast for us that... but I kept expecting the bubble to burst, which it did for us individually as a group, because we had had 3 solid years of it, and that's about the length that you stay number one,
It doesn't seem very odd now, of course, to talk about people dancing in the aisles and reacting the way they did to popular music. It's pretty well commonplace. I mean, if people don't do that now, you start to worry. But it really was quite extraordinary. We have to think hard, don't we, to remember what it was like before then.
It had never happened before. The only time they'd had any reaction similar to that was for Frank Sinatra and with the teenagers screaming and what have you.
Yeah, of course, it was Johnny Ray. He caused a bit of a...
Well, Johnny did, but not to the extent. In other words, Johnny did it with 1 or 2 records, but this was a case of... and in nightclubs and places like this. But the dancing and marching in the streets and things like this, it was just unheard of until that time. And it was almost as if the young people finally broke out, and had a chance to let off steam, so to speak.
You're here to, of course, perform.
Yes.
And one could ask, I suppose, the legitimate question, at your age, which is just a bit older than mine, why do you keep on with it?
Well, that's a good question, Brian, because I want to, is a simple answer. And now, of course, I find, and many people keep after me all the time. They say, "Bill, you're the leader. You're the one that started it. And if you retire, then we don't have the front runner anymore." And so I feel, and of course, I like to come to England. I love England. My mother was from here, and I like to come back every 2 or 3 years. My best friend is Patrick Mullin, and so it's a combination. It's a great pleasure to be here once again, and I'm looking forward to the tour.
So you go on doing it because you like it, and obviously
Yes.
because there is a demand for it.
Yes.
Otherwise, there'd be no point in it. Do people, though, now sort of put you up on a pedestal and not react the way they used to, react almost the way they might if they were going to a Tommy Dorsey concert or something, with respect?
Well, it's kind of strange, Brian. You would think that would be the case, but I find until we get to the theater or to the stage, that may be the case. Of course, with a lot of our older fans and people who've known us for over the years. But still, once we are in the theater and once we're ready for the show, it never changes. At least up until now, it has never changed. They react the same now as they did then to the music.
Are they the same people, though? That
Well,
react?
no, we always seem to gather new ones. I think probably curiosity seekers or what have you. But the thing is, if we lay it down, they'll pick up on it. That's the way I feel. And,
What do you think of the way popular music has developed since those days of yourself, Elvis Presley, then the Beatles? And of course, now we have all kinds of different kinds of popular music.
Well, Brian, that of course is very difficult to answer in a few words, but I find that a lot of the music today is good music. They're searching. I feel they're searching for that little spark. I think there's a spark missing now. We've had a bit of a surge with the disco and what have you, and but I feel it's about time for a new trend. But I feel there's a lot of very fine groups around today.
The trouble is, I think, that these days you have so many trends. You see,
Too many.
then you had the solo singer, the crooners as they were called, and you had dance bands, and not much else. And along came groups. Now, they were something quite different and quite new, because there have been groups in jazz before, but not so much in popular music. But now you've got all different kinds of groups, all sizes, different kinds of singers, rock and roll, even a ballad singer can have a hit now, a whole mixture. So I suppose it's pretty hard for anybody to work out what would be new, what would actually stand out among all the stuff that's there.
Well, it's hard to find. The trend as I see it now, or the path to something new, is the fact that once again they're dancing. And of course, disco has done this. And it's almost as if a cycle has happened, because they're back dancing now. Things that we call jitterbug, if you remember. I mean, a lot of the steps.
I don't
today,
actually.
Yeah.
If I did, I wouldn't admit it.
But they're the things that they dance to with Tommy Dorsey and with the swing bands, the same dance steps and what have you, which means that they want to dance again. So I feel it's time for a good trend. Now, of course, the disco beat, of course, was just the heavy 4-beat, which made the Beatles popular. This was the beat that they grabbed onto at that time. So I think that it needs another personality now. I'm not saying Bill Haley. Don't misunderstand me, but another Elvis Presley to come along at this time,
Yeah.
and I think someone will.
Another larger-than-life character.
Yes, because it's always been really a personage that's led it. The chubby checker with the twist, and the Bill Haley with the kiss curl, and the Elvis Presley, and we just haven't had that strong a personality. But one will be along very shortly, I feel.
Probably the top group of the moment internationally is the Bee Gees. What do you think of their music?
Well, they're a very fine group, and I like them very much. I'm a great fan of the Bee Gees. However, I feel they're good enough to retain their popularity for a long time. But the thing with the Saturday Night Fever, of course, is going to pass, as all good things do, and I feel that they're the ones of the moment. But unfortunately, the way it is in our business, there'll be somebody else along very shortly.
Yes, you've got to watch out who's coming up behind you.
Yes, that's it exactly.
If you'd like to put the headphones on there, Bill, we have Dominic, who's called in on the phone to talk to you. Dominic has called in from Brockley. Hello.
Hello there.
Yes, Dominic.
Hello. Good morning, Mr. Haley.
Good morning, Dominic.
Good morning. I've got two questions to ask of you.
Yes?
They involve Elvis Presley and your relationship vis-a-vis rock and roll.
Yes?
Number one is, I'm a great fan of Elvis Presley. I have for many years. I collect his music. How would you assess Elvis Presley? And what do you think of him both as a singer and as a performer? And number two, what has always intrigued me is that RCA Victor, who of course issue his records, always claim that he is the king of music, and he's acclaimed as the king of rock and roll, and that he fused rhythm and blues music with hillbilly music, and he was largely responsible for this. And yet, one and the same time, you and a number of others predate Elvis Presley. And from what you've been saying this afternoon, it appears that you, in fact, along with others, did the job that Elvis Presley is largely held responsible for. And I'd like to know your views and your comments on that.